So in this video, we're going to be looking at an example question and classifying these properties, whether they are physical or chemical properties. So we'll use our same color scheme as last time. Chemical will be this light blue color, and physical will be the red. Okay, so these are some properties of water. Hopefully you're familiar with some of these properties and maybe others not so much. So the first property is that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. So is that an example of a physical or a chemical property? So again, the differentiation here is a physical property. We don't need to change the water into something else to observe that property, whereas a chemical property, the water needs to change into something else for that to happen. So if we're thinking about freezing, the water turns into ice, so it is undergoing some transition, but when it's ice, it's still water. It's still H2O. It hasn't undergone a change into another type of substance. So a freezing point, freezing at 0 degrees Celsius, is an example of a physical property. Okay, now the fact that water does not burn. For something to burn means there's a chemical reaction happening, and it turns into something else. So that is an example, and when we see the word react or burn or something like that, that's a good clue that we're probably thinking about a chemical property. And so B is an example of a chemical property, that water does not burn. All right, let's think about number C, letter C, I should say. Corks float on water, but copper sinks in water. Now, we're thinking about different substances here, but the water itself is not changing. You know, it's just whether something floats or sinks in it. This is related to what we call the density, which is an important physical property and does not depend on the water changing into something else. So this is another example of a physical property. And then our final one, starch reacts with water. Now, the fact that you see the word react there should be a big clue. But starch reacts with water to form sugar during digestion. Since there's a transformation happening here into another substance, right? Water is turning and starch are turning into sugar. We have a new thing that they're turning into. This is an example of a chemical property. We can also think about whether these are intensive or extensive properties. Some of them don't really make any sense to think about that way, but in fact, all of these are intensive properties, if we're thinking about that, because all of these properties of water do not depend on how much water you have. And in general, chemical properties will pretty much always be intensive properties. So all of these, the fact that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, doesn't burn, the density that a cork floats on water, copper and sinks, and that starch reacts, those will all happen no matter how much water you have. You may get less of your final product, or you have to have very little corks or whatever, but these are all intensive properties. So coming back to that idea. So hopefully this was a useful example as we're thinking about classifying physical and chemical properties.